The Balance, journalism without agenda.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another Balance VIDCAST looking at the current situation in Israel and Gaza. Frankly, it is difficult choosing a particular topic to talk about at the moment because there is so much to talk about and it moves so quickly as well. So I've decided for today I will settle on something which is, as they say, in my wheelhouse, and that is to do with the terminology of war, in particular, the use of the word terrorist, because this has become a big thing. It's always been there. It's always been an issue. I think with what we've seen in the past week, particularly the actions of Hamas in Israel, that the use of the word terrorist has become a lot more high profile and in some places contentious as well. So I'm not going to get into that whole argument of one person's one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, because I think that's it's a bit reductive, it's a bit simplistic, and too black and white really for what we're talking about here. I think the best way to break it down is to look at two different sides: the political use of the word and the editorial, that is the media use of the word. Not surprisingly, the two do very much intersect. So Hamas is, and you can go back to a video which I did earlier in the week about this, an explainer about what Hamas is. It is a Palestinian group with a political wing and a militant wing. But that is not how everyone sees it. The US, the UK, Australia, Canada, they have made their decision to designate Hamas as a terrorist group, a terrorist entity. It is a legal definition in those countries. And as such, the way that they deal and speak about Hamas is dictated by that. Other countries, in fact, New Zealand, where I am, takes the view that, well, we consider the militant wing of Hamas to be a terrorist entity, but not the political wing. That was actually a decision taken back in 2010 by the then government. It was a national government, a right-wing conservative government. And it's, well, I was going to say interesting. It's actually not surprising at all to see, given that we are only a few days out from a general election here, that the current Prime Minister, the Labour Prime Minister, is now saying, maybe we should be revisiting that. I'm seeking some advice, which will go to whatever the next government is, excuse me, about whether we should be reviewing that designation. As I say, some timing not at all surprising there, looking at what has happened in Israel in the last week. But I heard a view from actually the Green Party here, one of the minor parties in New Zealand, the co-leader James Shaw, who, and I think this actually breaks things down really, really well. He says this: both Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces are targeting civilian populations. Those are acts of terrorism. They're crimes against humanity, and they need to stop. Benjamin Netanyahu, that is the Israeli Prime Minister, and the Israeli Defense Forces aren't Israel. That's not the Jewish population, just as Hamas is not Gaza or Palestinians. Well done, James Shaw. That is very succinct, I think, and that is the nuance, right? And I said this in that video earlier this week, but I want to expand on it a bit more. You can support the Palestinians in Gaza, particularly, but also the Palestinian cause to have its own country, its own state. You can support that without supporting Hamas or what Hamas has done in the past week. In fact, you can condemn Hamas for that, but you can still support the Palestinian cause. Equally, you can support Israel's right to defend itself and Israel's right to exist as it does, as a state. But you don't have to support the decisions of this current Israeli government or its army. You don't. It's not either or. You can be a whole lot more nuanced here. And I mean, I know social media is not the place for nuance, but some of the stuff out there, the attacks on people who show any amount of support for the Palestinians is quite extraordinary. What you have to watch, though, in times like this is what politicians are doing and saying. Well, okay. you have to watch what politicians are doing and saying all the time. But in times like this, when there is fear and when there is anger and outrage, let's be honest, it is a perfect time for politicians, for governments to push through things which would come under more scrutiny or more opposition in times of peace or in quieter times. I've got a specific example, but I do want to... let me just play you this. Remember this? This is 2001, after the 9/11 attacks. Have a look.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
So, George W. Bush, US president, at a time where obviously there was so much support for the United States after 9/11. And he made a sweeping statement like that, which kind of puts everyone on notice. And there would be plenty of countries who would just fall in line with that and go, well, we don't want to get on the wrong side of the United States, quite frankly. So, yeah, we're with you. We're not with the terrorists. I know 9/11... Well, they're calling this Israel's 9/11, aren't they? 9/11's always held up as that one time, that different time where everyone rallied. But actually, it's kind of it's similar here in the way that there is this very strong outrage from so many quarters. But of course, we know where things eventually led after 9/11. Yes, it went into Afghanistan and the so-called war on terror, but that was always leading into Iraq in the end. The example I was talking about before, I want to tell you about this, the UK Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who was visiting some Jewish areas of London the other day, and, where there has been a lot of fear, obviously, and people worried about themselves there and any sort of attacks on Jewish populations elsewhere. She said, I'm quoting here, "I would encourage police to consider whether chanting, such as, quote, 'From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free,' should be understood as an expression of violent desire to see Israel erased from the world." So she's trying to put into the police's hands the power to charge people and prosecute people for showing their support for Palestine. Because she's saying if they're going to say from the river to the sea, well, that means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, that's Israel now. So, that would mean Israel being wiped off the map. It's a ridiculous argument, I think, quite frankly. But the point is she's trying to say, well, she's not trying to say, she is saying we should be clamping down on people supporting Palestine and Palestinians. And again, it goes back to that thing, you can support the Palestinians, you can support the Gazans without supporting what Hamas is doing. In fact, you can condemn Hamas for what it's doing, but you can still support the Palestinian cause. So now we get into this crossover territory that I talked about between what the politicians are saying and deciding about who is and who isn't a terrorist and what the media is saying. You should just have a watch of this.
And they're not freedom fighters, they're not militants. They are pure and simple terrorists. And it's remarkable this morning to go to the BBC website and still see them talking about gunmen and militants and not calling them terrorists. I don't know what's going on there, but I think that it's time to get the moral compass out.
Why is it that they're not prepared to call Hamas terrorists? They're terrorists, they're a terrorist organisation by law. What could their possible reasoning be for not calling them terrorists but calling them militants? Yeah, it is weird, it's odd, and I understand why a few people are a bit perplexed by it.
So two Conservative MPs there, one of them a minister, basically saying the BBC needs to be tougher about this and needs to call a terrorist, to which the veteran BBC journalist John Simpson hit back, saying British politicians know perfectly well why the BBC avoids the word terrorist, and over the years plenty of them have privately agreed with it. Calling someone a terrorist means you're taking sides and ceasing to treat the situation with due impartiality. And actually, when you look at the BBC guidelines, editorial guidelines, they say we should use words which specifically describe the perpetrator, such as bomber, attacker, gunman, kidnapper, insurgent, and militant. We should not adopt other people's language as our own. And I agree with that. I worked at Al Jazeera, obviously, for many years. We never used the word terrorist there, unless it was a quote where someone was saying, this group is a terrorist, this person is a terrorist, these actions are terrorism. But we would not label any person or group as a terrorist. And look, I have mixed feelings about this, I'll be honest with you. I was narrating a documentary once at Al Jazeera. I can't even remember what it was about, but I know it made reference at one point to 9/11. And the script said, the September 11 terrorist attacks. Now, I wasn't the producer, I was literally just the narrator, so I read the script that I was given. And a day later, the producers got back in touch and then said, oh, look, management have watched this, because management, watches the programs before they go out, and said, we need to change that. It just needs to be the September 11 attacks. And part of me thought, look, when people fly commercial plane or hijack commercial planes and fly them into skyscrapers and kill thousands of people, it's terrorism, isn't it? I mean, they're terrorists. I don't think many people would disagree with that. But what I recognized is, A, the editorial guidelines of the channel say that we don't use this word, so we conform with that. But more importantly, it is the right thing to do. I believe it is, because if you start saying one act or one group is a terrorist, then you're getting subjective. And then you have to think about every time you come into, and there's going to be nuances in every different sort of attack or incident which happens. It is better and easier and more correct to take away the term and be more specific on each of those occasions and incidents than to use this blanket term which covers, well, it doesn't cover everyone, and that's why you can't use a blanket term like that. Okay, so as we wrap up this vidcast, just a couple of final quick thoughts. One, what Hamas specifically has done in Israel is horrific. There is this level of brutality about it which is incredibly shocking and different to anything we've seen before. It can't be condoned. It can't be excused. And equally, Israel, or the Israeli army, bombing Gaza, flattening buildings, killing civilians there whilst they're locked in and can't go anywhere, that is also horrific and brutal in a different way, but still horrific and brutal. Civilians are being killed on both sides, and please God, may it stop sooner rather than later. But instead of just looking at one side and trying to decide, well, is what they do terrorism or not? Are they terrorists or are they not? Look at both sides at the same time. Look at their actions. Now, there will be issues over proportionality, justification, David versus Goliath, however you want to look at it. There will be those issues, and that's for you to decide in your own head. But there are atrocities happening on both sides, and that can't be ignored just because of the prevailing narrative about one of those sides. If you've got a comment, a suggestion, a question, please leave it in the comments below on YouTube or on social media as well, or head to the Balanced website. You can leave me a message there and have a look at the other content which we are putting out there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Read, watch and listen online at the Balanced website.